Welcome to Ask the Lawyer. I'm your host, Patty Grabeau. Are you or a loved one facing bankruptcy? If so, you need immediate debt protection now, plus someone to help you find the best path to find a financially stable future. Joining us today is James Tamke, attorney and counselor at law, to address this issue when we come back on Ask the Lawyer.
Welcome to this edition of Ask the Lawyer. Ask the Lawyer is informative and exciting. Ask the Lawyer interviews authors, speakers, and entrepreneurs in all areas of business, so you become a much more informed consumer.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Patty Grabeau. Bankruptcy is an important decision, and the law in its application to one's particular situation can be very complicated. The right choice in legal help today can make a major difference as you begin to build for a better tomorrow. Joining us today is James K. Tamke, attorney, the founder of the law offices of James K. Tamke, PC. The firm concentrates its practice in the areas of individual Chapter 7 and 13, Business Chapter 11, and Farm Chapter 12. James K. Tamke, PC is a federally designated debt relief agency, which has proudly helped people file for bankruptcy relief under the Bankruptcy Code for over 20 years. Attorney Tamke earned his BBA in accounting, graduating from the University of Notre Dame, and received his JD from Glendale University College of Law. Most impressively, Attorney Tamke's court admissions include the Supreme Court of the State of Indiana, the United States District Court for the Northern District of Indiana, the Southern District of Indiana, and Western District of Michigan. He has also been admitted to the United States Tax Court in Washington, D.C., the United States Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati, and the United States Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Patty. It's nice to be here.
You are one busy guy.
I am.
Yes, you are. Okay, bankruptcy is considered a rather scary word in the English language, and none of us really want this as part of our life. You're very unique in that you're both a lawyer and a CPA. How does this aid you in the bankruptcy process with your clients?
Well, as a CPA, Patty, I developed a lot of analytical and technical skills that have allowed me to help people analyze their budgets of income and expenses and assets and debts. And one thing about bankruptcy, the numbers have to be right for someone to be successful in a bankruptcy, so it comes in handy an awful lot.
Of course it does, I'm sure. And prior to the show, you were sharing some stories of some famous individuals who have filed for bankruptcy and they've moved forward to achieve great things in their life. Can you please share some of these stories so for those viewers who are looking at bankruptcy right now won't feel alone?
Well, I'd be glad to, Patty. And I always tell my clients, don't feel guilty. Bankruptcy is an honest solution. For example, Walt Disney filed bankruptcy before he formed Disneyland and Disney World, and before there was a Mickey Mouse. And without bankruptcy and his fresh start, I don't think we would have had Disneyland, Disney World, and Mickey Mouse.
That's really something.
Absolutely. And another person was Henry Ford. He filed bankruptcy before his car company got up and running. He was a mechanic and engineer. So he had to file bankruptcy and got a fresh start. And let's face it, without that, we wouldn't have had a Ford Mustang or a Ford Explorer and some of the other nice cars.
I can't believe this.
And the one I save for last is, being a Hoosier, Abraham Lincoln's boyhood home was in Indiana, as you might have known. And Abe Lincoln tried a lot of things before he became president. One of them was being a shopkeeper in Illinois. He had bought up too much inventory for his store and had actually tried to consolidate several stores into one. And it got to the point where he could not afford to pay all his debts on time, and he went bankrupt. And then, of course, he went into politics and went on to great things. And I really think that the fresh start Abe Lincoln got and the things he learned in that really helped in bringing our country together at its most difficult time after the Civil War.
Isn't that interesting? And you take people from problem to solution, and that's the important thing.
Absolutely. And we always tell them that bankruptcy is not a failure, it is a fresh start. And just look at Abe Lincoln, Henry Ford, Walt Disney. I could mention a couple others.
I find this fascinating. Go ahead.
I don't know if you like chocolate, but
no, I hate it. I love it. Love it.
Yeah. Well, Milton Hershey filed bankruptcy.
Oh my goodness.
So you might not have a Hershey's bar without him getting his fresh start. Personally, I like to have French fries or ketchup on my French fries. H.J. Heinz filed bankruptcy as well. Now, when you read the biographies of those individuals, you probably won't see hardly anything, if at all, mentioned about the fact that they filed bankruptcy, because bankruptcy does not define who you are as a person. It gives you a fresh start in life, and what you do with it is up to you.
And you help people, guide them to get their fresh start.
That's what we do.
Now, when someone files for bankruptcy, can they get all their debts discharged, or are there certain debts that cannot be discharged in bankruptcy?
Well, Patty, most of our clients do get all their debts discharged. However, there are exceptions to that. For example, if someone owes child support is never discharged, and also student loans are generally not discharged in bankruptcy. But even in those cases, what will happen is they'll get their other debts discharged as far as credit cards and medical bills, and therefore they're able to afford to catch up on their child support and pay their student loans.
And when is the best time to file bankruptcy? Can anybody file bankruptcy whenever they want to?
Well, they can pretty much file whenever they want to, but the issue is, are they going to get a discharge from that bankruptcy, and when is the best time to file it? Now, if someone is about ready to be garnished by a creditor, then of course they want to go ahead and file before that garnishment takes place, after the creditor's gotten a judgment against them. But even then, timing can be a very important issue, because what will happen sometimes is someone is about ready to get garnished, and in the state of Indiana, that means that the creditor will be able to garnish 25% of their net wages. But also in the state of Indiana, tax refunds are usually taken by the bankruptcy trustee to pay to creditors. So people generally like to wait until they receive their income tax refunds before they file, and then they are able to spend down their tax refund and file, so a trustee doesn't get it. Now, if someone's on the verge of getting garnished, and it's near the end of the year, and they're going to get a tax refund, they have to weigh that against how much is going to be garnished between the time the garnishment starts and the time they get their tax refund. And let's say if they're expecting a $5,000 tax refund, and they're going to get $200 a week taken out of their paycheck, they do the math, and if it's better off to wait, then they'll file later rather than sooner. And also, I should mention that some people are facing a foreclosure, and in the state of Indiana, a foreclosure is done by sheriff's sale. Bankruptcy has to be filed before the sheriff's sale in order to save a house. So that will. Each case is different, and each fact pattern is a little bit different. So it really depends on the circumstances of each case as to when to file.
Right, and people would know about this or when to file unless they came to someone such as yourself.
Absolutely, and some people try to file without an attorney, and they run into all kinds of problems. They'll wind up losing tax refunds, or they'll lose a house, and so it's very important to seek competent legal counsel in this area to make sure that the timing is exactly right for them.
Well, I think what you brought up earlier was the fact that people think that it's a horrible thing, which it is. It's something that, I mean, it's not horrible. It's circumstantial, but you help people get through it and make them feel like they're not. They haven't done anything horribly wrong.
Yes, that's what we tell them. It's certainly not something they planned. They intended to pay all their debts, and actually, if the creditors would give them more time and not be calling them morning, noon, and night and disrupting their personal life, I think that if they would give them their whole lifetime to pay these debts off, people wouldn't be filing bankruptcy. But what usually happens is that people fall behind on a credit card or a medical bill because husband or wife lost a job, or they've lost some hours at their work, and they're not able to make the complete payment. Then something gets assigned to a credit agent that works on a commission, and they're just relentless.
They get hounded.
And they get hounded left and right. Yeah.
Right. Now, what effect does bankruptcy have on lawsuits or other collection actions that are taken by creditors before they file bankruptcy?
Well, actually, it doesn't matter what stage of the process the collection is at. When the bankruptcy is filed, automatically creditors must cease and desist all collection activity.
Okay.
Doesn't matter if they're at the stage of sending letters, they have to quit sending letters to the person that filed bankruptcy. They have to stop calling immediately. If they're in the middle of a lawsuit, they have to stop that. If they started a garnishment, that must cease immediately. So whatever stage that the person is at, it just stops everything in its tracks when the bankruptcy is filed.
And what about credit ratings? What kind of an effect does bankruptcy have on credit ratings, and can people get a better credit rating later on?
Well, that's a question that we get asked quite often, especially by younger people that file bankruptcy. Some of the older folks, people my age, for example, will tell me that I don't even want to see another credit card. But the younger folks come in and they have their hopes and dreams of buying a house and you know, getting their new vehicle and so forth. So that comes up quite a lot with them. And actually, generally, people that file bankruptcy have bad credit at the time they file. And filing bankruptcy, what it does, it puts a notation on the credit report that they filed bankruptcy. That'll stay on there for 7 to 10 years. However, it also makes that person debt free. So if I were a creditor about to consider loaning somebody some money, if I saw they didn't have any other debts, now the thing I would focus on would be their income. How long have they been on the job? How stable are they in their work and so forth? And more car dealers, for example, have special programs for people that have filed bankruptcy, and I think that's probably because a lot of the car dealers have employees that you know, that have actually filed bankruptcy, and they go to their superiors and say that, you know, there's a real market out here for these folks, and they're debt free. They're going to be good customers, and give them a chance.
Right. Now, how can people get in touch with you?
The best way is to give us a call at 574-289-8788, or if they'd like to, they could contact our website, which is indianabankruptcylawfirm.com. Either way would be fine.
They can get in touch with you that way. Hold your thoughts. We'll be right back with more from attorney James Tamke. What if people want to buy a car or a house after they file bankruptcy? Can they do that?
Yes, actually, as I was alluding to before we went to the break, there are more and more car dealers that are getting involved in it because they see this as an opportunity to get somebody that's basically debt-free, and as long as they have a job and they can produce a couple paycheck stubs to show that they're stable, and they actually take a lien on the car, so if it's not paid, they can repossess it. They're actually a pretty good credit risk, so we haven't seen problems with people trying to get vehicles after they filed. Now, as far as a house is concerned, I think they're going to look for a little bit more stability, because with a house, you're not talking about a 3 or 5 year loan. You're talking about a 20 or a 25 or a 30-year loan. They're going to want to see a little bit more stability, perhaps a year or two after filing bankruptcy, although we have seen people get them in less time, but certainly there is a lot of hope out there. And again, the purpose of a bankruptcy is to give one a fresh start, and to have them go on and later on be able to be productive members of society and be able to pay their debts in the future.
Now, do creditors look at the circumstances that led up to the bankruptcy? Do they often look back that way?
Absolutely. If there's a person that, let's say, had been making all their payments, had good credit, and perhaps they lost their health insurance because they lost a job, and then they had to go to the hospital, there were some large medical debts, that's certainly going to be considered in loaning somebody money again, especially if the person is reemployed, they've got health insurance again. But we always advise people in our office that when they get that new job, if there's a 30 or 60-day waiting period for health insurance, that you probably want to wait till you get that health insurance before you start making any changes in your finances.
I can understand that. And that's great advice. And what about back taxes?
Patty, that is the most misunderstood aspect of bankruptcy. As I mentioned, I've been filing bankruptcies for over 20 years. Most IRS agents and most lawyers truly believe that back taxes cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. Our office has been doing it for over 20 years.
Really?
Yes, and it's true that not all taxes are dischargeable in bankruptcy, But if the tax year is more than 3 years old, if the tax return was filed by the taxpayer more than 2 years ago, and if the assessment of the taxes by the IRS was done more than 8 months ago, and there was no fraud involved, then chances are pretty good that that tax is gonna be dischargeable. Now you might wonder, why would the taxes be assessed at a different time? And the reason is because some people get audited. And although an assessment is usually made right when someone files a tax return when they owe taxes, an audit might take place 3 years later, and the assessment for that particular additional amount would be made at that time. You have to wait at least 8 months after that to file. But the best thing for them to do would be to come in and talk to us, because it's very fact sensitive, and I have seen where people have tried to do these things themselves and they just get the timing all wrong, and maybe just by waiting an additional month or two they would have had $20,000 of taxes discharged, but they buy into this myth that taxes are not dischargeable, and then they find out later, and they come to see us and they want to know if we can reopen their case, but there's really nothing we can do at that point.
Interesting. And can somebody get rid of their IRS back taxes by filing bankruptcy? And do people lose property when they file bankruptcy?
Yeah, actually, you can get rid of federal IRS back taxes, as well as taxes owed to the Indiana Department of Revenue, Michigan Department of Treasury. We've even had some clients that have moved here from Arizona. It doesn't matter, any state, and the IRS can be dischargeable. As far as losing property, very seldom does somebody lose property by filing bankruptcy. The reason is because there are these things called exemptions. What that means is that each state legislature under the bankruptcy law is allowed to determine what property is exempt from creditors when somebody files bankruptcy, and those exemptions are generally pretty generous. When somebody is above the exemption amount, there are some things that can be done. If they come to see us in time, perhaps they could take a non-exempt asset. Perhaps they own too many cars that are owned free and clear. Well, they could perhaps sell one of them and then use the money to perhaps catch up on their mortgage or pay their living expenses before they file. And then they've had the benefit of what they would have lost had they filed bankruptcy and had the additional property that was not exempt. But for the most part, I would say just about everybody that files is going to keep all their property. Now, one thing I need to mention is if they're behind on their payments on a vehicle or on a mortgage, then they're probably going to have to file a different kind of bankruptcy. It's called a Chapter 13 to allow them to catch up their payments, and they have like up to 5 years to do that.
That's what I was going to ask. There's Chapter 7 and there's Chapter 13, and what are the difference between the two?
Well, the main difference is based on income. That's where we start in bankruptcy. We have to take a look at what's known as the median family income, which is a certain number for each person's household size that's developed by the U.S. Census Bureau. And now if our client is below that median family income, and what we actually do, we look back 6 months into what their income is, we divide it by 6 to get the monthly income, multiply it by 12 to estimate the annual income, compare it to this median annual income from the Census Bureau. If it's below that, then most likely they're going to qualify for a Chapter 7. However, if they're above that median family income, then we have to go to another step to see if we have to do a Chapter 13. Then we're able to take a look at some certain standards, national, regional, and local standards for food, clothing, transportation, and so forth. And if after subtracting those standards, there's no disposable income left over, we can still do a Chapter 7. But if there is income left over, then we have to go into a Chapter 13.
Now, assets and all, properties, all your assets and all aren't taken into account to determine if it's a Chapter 7 or 13, it's just income based?
Actually, yes, it's just income based pretty much, and whether or not you actually qualify legally. But even though you may qualify to do a Chapter 7, you may voluntarily choose to do a Chapter 13 because, and that's the reason they call Chapter 7 a liquidation. It's kind of a misnomer in most cases because there's nothing to liquidate because all the property is exempt. But when you have non-exempt property. You may have passed the means test in flying colors, but if you've got that extra property there, you may want to file a Chapter 13 to protect it and pay into a Chapter 13 trustee the amount that would have been paid to creditors in a Chapter 7 had that Chapter 7 trustee actually liquidated or sold that property for the benefit of the creditors.
So if you file Chapter 13, do you have to pay back all your debts?
That's another myth about bankruptcy. As a matter of fact, most people that file Chapter 13 pay less than 100%. Some pay as little as 10% or even 0%, because what you can do once you get into a Chapter 13, then you can be very creative. For example, if you've got some back taxes, and as I mentioned, some taxes are dischargeable, some are not. If you've got the kind that are not dischargeable, let's say it's for last year's taxes or 2 years ago, what you can do is kind of form a payment plan for the IRS with your Chapter 13, and these are bills that, or these are expenses, debts that you would have to pay. Even if you did a Chapter 7, they would survive the Chapter 7, or child support if someone's behind in their child support. Put those in your Chapter 13, make that your payment. By the time you pay those are considered what we call priority debts. There might not be anything left over to pay unsecured creditors, and then you have what one trustee called, when I would do it, he called it a disguised Chapter 7. In other words, they got the benefit of Chapter 7 by filing Chapter 13 and paying what they were going to have to pay anyway.
That is so interesting. And how is Chapter 13 different from a private debt consolidation service or a private debt negotiation company?
Well, Patty, I found that there's basically two kinds of these private debt consolidation companies. There's the ones that are legitimate, that really try to help people, and then there's the kind that basically take their money and I'll be real frank, they're scams. But there are some legitimate ones that people get involved with that may be affiliated with their church and so forth, and they really try to help them, but they just don't have the same tools available that are available in bankruptcy. For example, there's no court protection, and if somebody's got maybe 10 or 20 debts, they may do an excellent job of negotiating 2, 3, 4, or maybe 5 of those, but if the person's still at risk of being sued for the other 15 or 20, what good does it really do them? And so a lot of people that go to these companies, they'll spend a lot of money and they still wind up filing bankruptcy in the long run to get rid of everything that they have to get rid of to get a fresh start.
Amazing. Now, how long does a Chapter 13 last, and can be switched over to Chapter 7 later if need be?
Yeah, excellent question. If someone is above that median family income that I mentioned, they have to be in the Chapter 13 for at least 5 years and then pay all disposable income during that period to the Chapter 13 trustee. If they're below the median family income, and let's say they're just filing a Chapter 13, they pass the means test for Chapter 7, but they want to do a Chapter 13 to pay some back child support or maybe catch up the arrearage on their house and save their house, then they can be in as little as 3 years, and they can, as I alluded to in a prior example, they can have as little as 0% going to their unsecured creditors. Now, as a practical matter, in most Chapter 13s, the trustee's job is to make sure that our clients pay in whatever they can afford. So as a practical matter, they're probably going to be paying in 10%, maybe 20%, but certainly in most cases a lot less than 100%. And I'm sorry, what was your other question?
Can it be switched over to Chapter 7 later if need be?
Oh, absolutely. And we see that a lot where people go into Chapter 13 because husband and wife are both gainfully employed, and all of a sudden the bottom drops out. One of them loses their job, they go on unemployment, and they come back to us and say, we can't make our Chapter 13 payment, and we'll say, well, just do the best you can, and then at some point the trustee will probably file a motion with the court to have your case dismissed. When that happens, we will convert you over to a Chapter 7, and when we do that, we can take all the Chapter 13 debts and have them discharged. Then we can also take all the debts that were incurred after they filed Chapter 13 and before we converted and have them discharged. Now, the only risk there is if you haven't caught up all your arrears on your house yet, then there's the risk of losing your house. But the good news there is that the mortgage company usually doesn't have enough time to take your house. What will happen? We'll convert it over, and then they won't agree to have our client reaffirm on the house, we'll say, okay, fine. We get the Chapter 7 discharge, get all the debts discharged, then we can turn around and file another Chapter 13. It's called a no discharge Chapter 13 because you can't get another discharge that soon, but why would they need a discharge? They've already gotten everything discharged except for the mortgage, which they want to pay.
Right. Now, how can people get in touch with you?
Give us a call. That's the best way. 574-289-8788.
Great.
Or if they prefer, they can contact our website, indianabankruptcylawfirm.com.
Fantastic. Stay tuned. Ask the Lawyer. We'll be right back. Now, does everyone know when a person files for bankruptcy, or is it kept confidential?
Actually, unless you tell someone that you filed bankruptcy, chances are they're not going to find out. Although it is public information, it's not one of those things that newspapers find newsworthy. So it might be in the legal section in the fine print that nobody looks at. But generally speaking, people don't find out unless you tell them or unless you're famous.
And then what about the family? How does it affect the family?
Well, the family gets a fresh start, and the whole idea of bankruptcy is so that, there's this duty to pay your debts. There's also a duty legally to provide for your family. When those two duties conflict, the person has to make a choice. So people, unless they're deadbeats, they're going to choose their family every time. So families do prosper, and then the second generation probably won't be facing the same sort of dilemma as their parents, and it's a learning process, but it's good for the family.
You're right, and you're there to help them and walk them through it and give, like you said, give them the fresh start. I can't thank you enough for joining us today.
Thank you, Patty.
We enjoyed having you on. That's it for this edition of Ask the Lawyer. I'm Patty Grabeau, and we thank you for choosing us as your go-to resource for information concerning only the most innovative topics today.